Rick, what an incredible 2021 you've had. Moving now obviously into 2022 and a new year. I'm sure it will bring up so many more incredible experiences. But for the listeners, I'd love to dive into some of those experiences you have had and hear some of those stories that we would love to learn from as well. What you've learned from them and maybe some insights that we can provide to anyone listening to help develop their golf game, their coaching and anything like that. So let's dive into one of the biggest ones of them all. Obviously the Open Championship, Collin's win, a win for the whole team, and just amazing. He continues to amaze everyone that watches, and obviously develop the game of golf. So I'd love to hear some of the stories there and some of the lessons that you learned as a coach. And yeah, just all about that amazing experience, really.
Yeah, you bet. No, it's super fortunate that 2020 and 2021 have been amazing for me as a coach, and to see Collin's progress, and he's an amazing athlete, obviously. And I think you mentioned a key thing is, as a coach, what am I learning? And I think I'm always learning, because being at these highest stages, what I'm finding is that the little things make a big difference. And the Open Championship was no different. And it's interesting, because of COVID and everything, I did not travel overseas, and yet we're trying to prepare as a team. His caddy JJ, Collin, myself, his physical trainer, we meet a couple weeks before he's going to leave to go overseas, and the goal is to be prepared to be at your best, obviously. And I know that's a little vague, is like, what is your best? And for the physical fitness, you're going to be traveling a long ways, and can the body feel good, and the time change, and all the things. And then when we look at swing, which I'm Collin's swing coach, is what are some of the shots we're going to need overseas? He had never played links golf, so in a way we're guessing. And in Las Vegas, where he lives, we're preparing for a links golf
a little bit different
in the desert. But I think part of that shows is that we could be creative as players and coaches to get what we can get done, to understand where we want to go with it. And in this case, we knew links was going to be more related to flighting irons and wind and those type of things.
You're buying wind machines and rain machines.
Not quite yet, but maybe down the road we will. And so I think it's an interesting is Collin and some of the other players I work with, they really enjoy new experiences, right? So they look forward to it as a challenge instead of, oh, I don't know if I'm going to be any good at this. And I think that's part of the mindset that we want to go into any new experience with. And in this case, he's going overseas to play the Scottish Open first, and then the Open Championship. And how is he going to perform? I don't know. We don't know. It's a new experience for him. And I think as we got him ready, all systems were go, but until you're there, you really don't know what is going to happen, right? And I think what I would love the listeners to know about is that it's not always good at the start, right? You and I talk a lot about flow, and part of flow is struggle.
Definitely.
And at the Scottish Open, he was 71st, barely made the cut in 71st. And then if you were a player and you were 71st in a tournament, are you ready to win the next week at the Open Championship? Some people would probably say no. And I think Collin is different, and some other athletes would say, wait a second, that's not the result I wanted. However, what did I learn from it, right? So I'm very much into curiosity and learning instead of just being critical of what went wrong and, oh my gosh, I did this bad and stuff like that. It's you ask the right questions, you're going to get some better answers. And yet if we're critical, all we're doing is saying, I did this bad, I did this poorly, and there's really nowhere to go from that other than just the negative self-talk of reinforcing that. So I was very proud of how Collin took that week at the Scottish Open, and speaking to him on the Sunday night, the Monday, the Tuesday of the next week, is saying, wait, this is what happened. Okay, my iron play wasn't as where it needed to be. I didn't have good turf interaction with what the irons were doing. I went to TaylorMade and say, hey, can we work on maybe either changing a grind or changing that? And they ended up changing the actual clubs, for his short irons. And that was enough after his Monday practice round to go, great, we got that taken care of, because turf conditions are different there than they are here in the States. And so that's the first thing. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? Is
solution.
we talked about some swing stuff too, of that there's going to be different, attack angles and stuff, but there basically was different turf conditions. He was curious of why the club wasn't coming through how it wanted. He looked at it from an equipment standpoint, solved that, felt great after the Monday practice round, knew that was taken care of. And then throughout the week, the other major adjustment he made was that the green speeds at the Open Championship were slower than here in the States. And so his grip, and it's become quite popular to talk about his saw grip with his putting. Well, he didn't change that per se, but outside 25 feet, he did go back to a conventional putting grip, which has allowed him to feel it more and have some more speed control on these slower type of greens. So when you look at those two examples, is that Collin was looking at the Scottish Open, I didn't achieve my performance goals of approach shots, and my putting was just a little off with speed. And then he's looking at, okay, what did I learn? And that fed him into creating confidence, creating a plan, and making adjustments, and being open to adjustments, right? I think some people are fearful of that.
Absolutely. I think there's a few things you've mentioned there that's so important. One of them, and I've heard this from quite a few successful athletes, especially in the basketball arena, and they all say similar things, but it's not about not falling off the tracks. The most successful people, they all fall off the tracks at some point, but they have the processes and systems to get back on quicker than anyone else. And I think Collin has displayed exactly there, and obviously with yourself and the rest of the team, being able to identify a process that can get you back on the tracks as quickly as possible, and more than back on the tracks, but on the way to success almost immediately. But I would imagine, Rick, and correct me if I'm wrong, that requires huge amounts of self-awareness, because golf is not a sport like others. You look at basketball, you look at football, soccer. I would call football. We'll talk about both. I said football, talking about the real football from my perspective, but we'll call soccer as well. But soccer as well, and many others. You can watch almost the entire game, your entire performance back, and you can really dive into the details. Golf's slightly different. It's very difficult to watch more than probably 10 or 15 shots per round of your entire performance. So it must require huge amounts of self-awareness to be able to identify what those issues were, look at them without any ego, without any judgment, and then to be able to determine what the right decision is, the right solution is for that problem. So that self-awareness must be key.
It is, and it's a great point. And I know you and I use a lot of post-round assessments with our clients and our students. Is we want to help them ask the right questions. Certainly as coaches, we can be on a call with them every single day, but I want the athlete to be asking them those questions of themselves constantly. So there's always this feedback loop of saying, okay, that was the result. Was that close to my intention? If it wasn't, what was about it that was off? Was it a physical? Was it a mental, emotional, right? Decision? All those things, if you can create a very tight feedback loop, you can make adjustments. And then what you'll start seeing is that now we'll call them positive results happen. You have a feedback loop about that too. Oh, yeah. I'm playing better because I'm doing this, this, and this. And then you have a recipe for success that helps you with that. And so I think, you and I have certainly, we want to empower our students with asking questions that are about learning and not about critical. It's not about, the old, how did you play today? What did you shoot? That's really not a starting point, right? It's like, what did you learn? What did you do well? What are some of the things that we can take to the next round, or what are some adjustments? You start framing these questions differently. You're going to start having more of that self-awareness. And I think in golfer, and like you mentioned, I think golf is, it's an individual sport, obviously. Sometimes golfers feel like they're on an island, right? And they're alone and stuff like that. And yet, if they can do their self-coaching and their self-awareness and asking the right questions, it's going to help them perform better, which is ultimately what you and I are training our players to do. So I'm completely agree with what you're talking about with self-awareness. It is a skill, and it has to start with asking questions that are non-critical, right?
It's all about the learning, isn't it? It's prioritizing that learning. And something you actually said, and we've spoke about this before, Rick, in the past, but you actually learn just as much from your athletes, from your clients, as they learn from yourself. And you've always focused on that. And I think the amount that you prioritize learning as a coach, and this is, I think, great advice for coaches, or definitely something to think about for coaches, is in ingraining that learning mindset into you, because that will then always ingrain back into your clients, back into your players, back into your athletes. And I think that's so important. And I love that about yourself, is that you're not just going out externally to find more information to teach the player, but you're actually understanding that you can learn from absolutely anyone. And that learning mindset from you then embeds into your players as well. So I love that. And I think it's so powerful.
No, thank you. And we do want to empower our golfers and our athletes to be able to look at things in a different way. I know you've mentioned, we've talked about like observer mindset, right? Which I'd love to hear more on your perspective on that. Is sometimes it's so result oriented and we're so in the moment, it's very much good or bad. And I think sometimes we have to pull away from it a little bit to really look at what happened in the performance. And I think when Collin looks back at the Scottish Open, he can remove any of that emotion and just look at like, oh, this is not what happened. This is what happened. Okay, now let's move on. Let's make an adjustment. And to me, that makes learning a lot quicker, because we're taking away some of that negativity of that self-critical voice.
It's almost removing yourself from the situation and being able to look at it from a third person perspective. So then going through your thoughts, your emotions, your reactions, any of your mistakes and things like that, and actually just observing them without judgment, and actually with curiosity instead. So instead of saying, I did this poorly, or my driving was poor, or my putting wasn't where I wanted it to be, actually just being curious and saying, okay, well, why was my putting poor? Or why was my iron play not the way it usually is? And I think asking questions from a space of curiosity, rather than making statements from a space of critical or criticism, is actually really powerful. And I think that's probably the place to start, and what Collin has been able to do so successfully in that gap between the Scottish Open and the British Open. So no, amazing performance. Rick, just a question. So obviously, as you mentioned, you didn't travel with Collin. It must have been quite difficult, especially with, I guess, communication channels to some extent. So a lot of your conversations will have been, I imagine, online rather than in person, which is what you tend to be used to. So from a coach's standpoint, and I'm sure you're now, with your busy schedule, you're seeing or using a lot more of that communication channel with all of your players, all of your athletes. How do you manage to still communicate your messages successfully and make sure that the player understands and interprets your message or your point of view successfully and effectively, even when it's on online conversations and not in person?
No, it's a great point. And I think through COVID, I learned a lot about those communication channels. I have a lot of college players that were not able to see me in person and such, and we had to utilize Zoom and certainly phone conversations a lot more. I think when it comes to Collin, the bulk of the coaching was already done before he left, and I think that's, as coaches, we have to be aware of, is there's preparation type of coaching, and then there's in the moment strategy. Well, with golf and with Collin's team, JJ, his caddy, has become kind of a second coach, is that he has very self-aware of Collin's game and their strategies and stuff like that. So we've done preparation, and then there might be adjustments depending on the self-awareness of the athlete, right? So Collin can say, hey, turf interaction with the iron is doing blank. What could that be, Rick? Or something like that. We've had those conversations before, but it's not every single day trying to have 2 hours of coaching, because I'm hoping the coaching's done. It's preparation time, right? And so him and I usually are going to speak after a Tuesday where he's had now maybe 2 times to look at a course practice round. If I'm not on site, we're discussing after his first round of how did the course play in a tournament setting. And then from there, it's very organic as far as what he needs, which is usually very little, I'll be honest with you, because again, the preparation has been done. And so that's part of where I think we have to, as coaches, have to be careful of not overcoaching. Yes. And always checking in. Oh, listen, I saw what you shot. Oh, what happened? It's like, wait a second, let the player take some ownership for it, let them ask questions, let them, I think sometimes we get into a fixing mode a little bit too easily. And I think technology has actually made it easier to do that. So people are sending videos and this and that, everything, fix me. It's like, wait a second, let's look at the patterns. Let's look at the things that are happening and asking those questions. So yes, certainly using phone and cell phones and Zoom to connect is great. I just see at times people are now over coaching from a distance, and that could be dangerous because you're not there observing it as well, if that makes sense.
And I guess the more information you provide, the more opportunity you have for misinterpretation, especially in an online conversation as well. And actually that reminded me, Rick, of a great story I heard about one of the greatest soccer managers on the planet, arguably Sir Alex Ferguson, and a conversation that an interviewer actually had with him, where he asked him the question of the power of simplicity. And he basically said, what's the difference between a good coach and a great coach? And he brought this concept of simplicity into it. And he threw a tennis ball to the interviewer. And he said, can you catch that one tennis ball? And he said, yeah, no problem, caught it. Then he threw 2, 3, 4, 5 tennis balls. And by the point that that guy had tried to catch 5 tennis balls, he was struggling to catch 1, let alone 5 of them. And the message that Sir Alex Ferguson had was, good coaches will throw 5 tennis balls and hope that their player catches 1, whereas great coaches will throw 1 tennis ball and make sure that tennis ball is the most important and the priority for that player. So I think your point on overcoaching, that story kind of connects with it quite nicely, to say, look, simplicity actually there is a genius to it. So not overloading the player with information, especially when you have another variable of this online communication and the opportunity for misinterpretation. So that's really interesting, really interesting. I guess as well, it's one of the things we talk about, one of the criteria to create social flow alignment that we talk about with FlowCode Golf Academy is obviously focused group attention. And I would imagine that actually it becomes even more vital when you're in an online setting, because it's very easy to get distracted by things going on around you when you're not in person with the player. So I imagine that becomes even more important to ensure that every single stakeholder in the conversation is completely focused in the conversation and coming out with solutions that will improve the performance the next time. So really interesting to hear those insights, Rick. Really interesting.
Yeah, so I think when we look back at that week, I'm certainly checking in with Collin. I get to see some of his shots, certainly through the telecast on the television, but I'm not seeing every shot, right? And I'm not, there like I am mostly when I'm at other majors, I'm seeing every single shot he hits from the gallery's perspective. And then after a round of golf, speaking with him and his caddy JJ to kind of get some feedback. Okay. Hey, Collin, I noticed you did this on this hole. What was the thought process? Hey, was there a decision type of here, da, da, da. And sometimes honestly, that feedback conversation is only a few minutes long, but that helps me as a coach get to figure out what was going through his mind, commitment to shot. Maybe it's a swing thing. And that's wrapped up pretty quickly afterwards. When I don't get to see every single shot, I have to now trust the student, right? And I have to trust the team behind it. And of course, I trust Collin immensely, but with other players that I work with, sometimes they're going to give me, back to the self-awareness idea, they're going to give me what they just want me to hear instead of what would actually be valuable information, or they're going to make excuses. And that's a big pet peeve of mine is, oh, I didn't play well because it was windy. Well, then that means that your game, that you can't fly at irons, we have to work on that. Or if you have a swing coach, you better work on. So I don't want excuses. That we want to be able to say this happened. There's a cause and effect relationship. And I think as you look at the best players in the world, they do take ownership for their performance, and they do, back to the self-awareness, they know why the ball is going where it's going if they're truly honest with themselves. Just be honest with yourself, everybody. It will shorten your learning curve tremendously. Okay.
That's a great point, Rick. Really good point, because if you're not honest with yourself and then you're trying to find solutions and solve problems with your coach, but you're not actually solving problems based upon the truth. You're solving problems based upon what your a random emotional interpretation, or actually something that you're not being honest about. You're going to struggle to make the progress that you want to make, because you're not actually solving a problem that exists potentially. You're solving a problem that you interpreted exists, or actually a problem that you wish existed potentially? It's a really important conversation that actually, if you're not honest, you are going to be a detriment to your own improvement and own development. So it's a great point to make and really important one.
Exactly. So, we look at that Open Championship, and as the week went on, and he, had a good solid first round. The second round on the Friday was just awesome. His front nine just going, and you could, we know as golfers we create momentum sometimes, and certainly good results help the momentum going. Yet he still had work to do. Right? It's great to have a wonderful second round and put yourself in the mix, but the golf course was playing. There wasn't a ton of wind at that time, so people were still shooting some low scores, and it was hard to separate from the field. And I think speaking with him on the Saturday night before the final round is, and this is for all golfers, is looking forward to that final round, or that round with our friends on a Sunday morning or something like that. Is let's look forward to that. And again, the opposite of flow is fear, right? It's like, I don't, if I fear something, I don't want any part of it. And we've talked about the word curiosity before, and that's my favorite way of saying, if I'm curious about something, I want to take it on. I want to learn about it. But fear-based becomes, I don't want anything about that. And I think it's going to be key for golfers to embrace that. It doesn't mean you're going to succeed. Okay. But you look forward to, hey, I wonder how I'm going to play in that environment. Oh, I wonder how I'm going to play in the final group. Or to me, that at least gets us going in the right direction. And of course, Collin embraces those situations very, very well in that environment. And he was excited, and he really wanted to see how it was going to go. And the intention was to win. And I think that's the other thing, which we may talk about on a separate episode, is it's okay to want to win.
Yeah, of course.
As much as we talk about the process and stuff, I love talking about processes because that's what it is. But there has to be a clear goal going ahead of time. And if you're going to win, that's one goal. If I want to make the cut, or if I want to shoot 75, those are all different goals. You will have different intentions and different processes that would get you to that. So if we're going to win, we're going to have to be a certain type of player to do that. And I think Collin understands his DNA as it comes to that. And I would want every listener to understand, when you're at your best, what are you thinking, feeling, and doing, right? And part of that is what we've talked about today, is the self-awareness of when you've played great. What was going on, right? And some of it was real simple, everybody. And then other times when maybe you didn't perform how you want. Can we be honest with ourselves with that self-awareness? So, looking back at the Open Championship, and of course, Collin won, and so proud of him and how he handled all of that. It was physical, it was preparation, it was mental, it was a great team, it's got a great caddy. There's a lot of things that go into performance. And if we can be self-aware and look at those different pieces, I believe everybody's going to improve at a better clip.
Definitely. I think the word for this episode, Rick, is definitely curiosity as well, because you spoke about, and it kind of came full loop, we spoke about the new experience of playing links golf, and then we finished it with the new experience of stepping into the final day and being excited for the new experience of basically the opportunity to win the British Open, and an incredible new experience for Collin, and the excitement that comes behind that. So I think for every single listener, it is to have that curiosity on how you will perform in new experiences and be excited for that opportunity. So no, what an episode, what an experience, Rick, and a fantastic 2021. We'll come back with more episodes, and we'll speak about more of our experiences in 2021, what we've learned from them, and some great insights for the listeners. But really enjoyed that, Rick. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Hallam. Let's keep giving them great information.
Absolutely.